don't know the power of
The spice,
What is it doing to me?
the spice expands consciousness.
What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and welcome back to another video and another episode of Spice of the Week, where we take a look at some of the most unique and interesting decks currently being played in the Pauper format. And just like every week, today I have selected 3 decks that we're going to be taking a look at that were played in-person tournaments over this last week, and that really truly kind of exemplify exactly what the play experience can kind of be like when playing in paper versus playing on an online format like MTGO. But before we get any further, if you would like to support the channel, if you could leave a like on this video and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And with that said, let's get into it. And the first deck we're taking a look at is Grosella deck by Michael Biro, and it appears that this deck is Gruul Affinity, and Affinity is always pretty powerful, so let's see what they brought in their list. So we got 3 copies of Burning Tree Emissary. So not necessarily a card you see a ton of, has popped up here and there in like mono green stompy type of lists, as it's a great way just to dump your hand. And then we also got 4 copies of Carapace Forger. So with an affinity, I mean, this could easily be just a 2 mana 4/4, which does seem pretty good. 4 toughness is very relevant in the format. Then we also got 4 copies of Experiment 1. So this is a pretty powerful 1-drop that grows over time, especially with things like Carapace Forger and, possibly, obviously we see they're also running 4 copies of Mirror Enforcer. This is a card that could grow pretty consistently throughout the game. Not a card you see a ton of, but definitely a very powerful 1-drop. We also got 3 copies of Frogmite, so another affinity card. Kind of one of the main affinity cards that you see in affinity decks. Frogmite and Mirror Enforcer. I'm surprised they're not running 4 of the Frogmite. It's just like a really great card. Easily a free spell. And then we also got 2 copies of Hooting Mandrills. This could just be, depending on what they have on their graveyard, easy 1 mana 4/4 trample since it has delve. So that is also not another card you see popping up a lot. I have seen it from time to time in decks, but definitely it seems like a pretty good green card. And then we also got 1 copy of Clan Shaman, as there are a lot of kind of swarmy go wide decks in the format right now, especially in the forms of White Weenie and Koldatha Red being the main aggressor. So having instant speed board wipes is a very necessary thing to have. And if you're going with the affinity route, Clan Shaman is definitely one of the better board wipes that you could run, especially if you have access to red mana. Alright, in their sorcery pile, they just got 2 copies of Ren's Resolve. So this is a very good grindy card here. I am a huge fan of Ren's Resolve. As someone who plays Ping or Burn, even though it has kind of fallen off the meta a little bit, I think running cards like Ren's Resolve or Reckless, I think it's Reckless Impulse, they're just very, very good cards. Definitely very powerful in the format. Okay, we also got 4 copies of Demand Answer. So this is kind of a newer card. I have seen it popping up in certain decks, especially things like Rakdos Burn or the Madness deck, as well as even in Boros Synth. It's a very good card. It has a lot of variability in the additional costs, as you can either sack an artifact or discard a card, and it's just a 2 mana draw 2 spell. And in a deck with a bunch of artifacts, this is a very good draw spell for it. And we also got 4 copies of Galvanic Blast, because if you're on the affinity plan and you're in red, this is just an auto include in your decks. This is a great 1 mana removal spell, and it has a lot of versatility as well. You could use it as a creature removal, or you can use it to just finish off your opponent for 1 mana if they're at 4 or less life. Because we are got a very much a beatdown strategy here with all their big creatures, all their 4/4s with their Mirror Enforcers, Hooting Mandrills, and their Carapace Forgers. Alright, so in their artifacts, we got 11 artifacts. We got 4 copies of Experimental Synthesizer. Definitely a very powerful card in the format. This I've seen it in multiple decks. I mean, you see it in like Jeskai Affinity builds as well as Koldatha Red. As I've even seen it in Pinger Burn, and obviously there is Boros Synthesizer. Synthesizer being, part of the name of that archetype. So definitely very good card. You can see more of your deck. Also can use it to create a creature and give the old samurai beatdown with this as well. So really, really good card. We also got 3 copies of Ichor Wellspring. Very, very much a staple in the format at this point. I mean, it has a lot of synergy with Demand Answers, as this would be like probably the most ideal artifact to sacrifice for with that card, because then it's basically a 2 mana draw 3. So that is very good. Also got 4 copies of Springleaf Drum. A nice way to help fix your mana. It's also just a 1 mana artifact to up your affinity cap. Alright, and that's all of their spells in the main deck, and they are on a 17 land build. We got 2 copies of Dark Steel Citadel, one basic forest, 4 Great Furnace, 2 mountain, 4 copies of Slagwood's Bridge, and 4 copies of Tree of Tales. So basically, they're maxing out all the artifact lands they can. But not quite. I mean, they could go up to 4 Darksteel Citadels, but that being basically a colorless land is not really ideal. I think generally you're going to be on the 1 to 2 range if you're running Darksteel Citadel in a 2 color deck, or maybe even in a 1 color deck. I probably wouldn't run more than 2, just because you don't really want to be put in a situation where you're just flooding out with your Darksteel Citadels and you haven't been able to draw a red or a green producing land, or the extra red or green producing land you need to actually play the cards in your hand. So it definitely seems like this is a pretty solid choice for just their mana base. Alright, and in their sideboard, we got 3 copies of Gleeful Sabotage. They do run a fair amount of creatures in this deck, so Gleeful Sabotage is definitely basically you get to kill 2 artifacts or enchantments for 2 mana. It's pretty nice. So, other affinity decks are gonna also be a problem for you. So you're gonna want to be able to deal with that, especially with all the glitters out there. That card is just so incredibly busted. I'm honestly surprised it's lasted this long in the format, but that is where we are. We also got 3 copies of Gorilla Shaman, another way just to get rid of artifact lands or just non-creature artifacts in general. And it is a very powerful card. Has fallen off a little bit in terms of what I have been seeing people running for their artifact hate, but it is still a great card, especially in a deck like this where they're trying to kind of be a little swarmy as well and have a bunch of creatures on the field. Seems like a pretty good choice overall. Also got 2 more copies of Crackland Shaman, because against the swarmy decks you do need as many sweepers as possible. And then we got 4 copies of Red Elemental Blast, as the blue decks are also very dominant in the format and you need to be prepared for them, and 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus. So obviously terror decks and lots of cards that want to combo out of the graveyard and just play out of the graveyard in general are very present in the format. So, and that would definitely seem like a pretty tough, especially the terror decks are going to be a pretty tough matchup for a build like this. So yeah, I could definitely see going up to 4, but 3 definitely seems like minimum. uh, I generally like to run 3 to 4 pieces of Graveyard Hate in a lot of my sideboards, so this does seem like a pretty well constructed sideboard. And I nearly forgot, they got 1 enchantment in their main deck, so Makeshift Munitions seems to make a lot of sense here, especially with them being an affinity list. Once they have a bunch of artifacts on the field, they can just kind of win the game with Makeshift, especially if they're just giving you the old beatdown with a bunch of 4/4s here with their Foragers, Mirror Enforcers, Hooting Mandrills, etc. So it definitely seems like a pretty interesting build. Okay, guys, and the next deck we're taking a look at is another flavor of Affinity. This time we got Is It Affinity deck by Cabra 12. Let's take a look at what they brought for Is It Affinity. So in their creature pile, we got 16 creatures. We got 4 copies of Frogmite and 4 copies of Mirror Enforcer. So definitely some of the usual suspects when it comes to Affinity builds. So yeah, Frogmite, Mirror Enforcer, pretty standard there. We also got 4 copies of Ornithopter and 4 Phyrexian Walker. Now we've definitely been used to seeing Ornithopter, especially in the All That Glitters decks. Phyrexian Walker is not something you do see very often, though it's definitely obviously legal in the format, but not a very common one. It is one of my favorite old cards. I used to play this card a lot in older decks way back in the day, so really happy to see this being played. Also just have a lot of love for the older cards. All right, so let's take a look at what they got in their sorceries. We got 6 sorceries here. We have 2 copies of Reverse Engineer. This card has Improvise, which means you can use your artifacts to help you pay for this cost. So a lot of times this is probably going to be a 2 mana spell. So 2 mana to draw 3 cards. I do remember seeing some people playing this in Grixis Affinity for a while. Not really sure if they still are, but still a pretty solid card, and is basically copies 5 and 6 for Thoughtcast, which they're also running 4 of here. So another great affinity spell to one. Usually you're going to cast this for 1 mana and draw 2 cards, so a great way to keep filling up your hand and maintaining card advantage throughout the game. Alright, and in their instant pile, we got 3 copies of Demand Answers. Definitely a very solid card, like we were just talking about in the previous deck when looking at affinity builds, as there's just a lot of variability that you can do for the alternate cost. Just a great 2 mana draw 2. And we also got 1 copy of Keep Watch. So this is definitely very much of a meta call here, because there are some very swarmy decks, like we've said with Koldatha, White Weenie. I mean, you don't see it very much, but slivers are out there as well. A lot of people are not very well prepared for that deck. So keep watch. You can definitely draw a lot of cards, though you're probably also taking a bunch of damage. But hey, at least you got some cards in your hand. All right, and then we also got 4 copies of Metallic Rebuke. Another card with Improvise. This is basically a 1 mana counterspell most of the time, especially if you got, a couple artifacts on the field. And we also got 3 copies of Rites of Initiation for 1 red mana. You can discard any number of cards at random, and creatures you control get +1/+0 for each card discarded this way. Now, this card is kind of odd. I have seen it popping up. I'm not generally a huge fan of cards like these, but it's definitely a way to give, like, maybe an Ornithopter a bunch of power to maybe swing for lethal, or just to like put a bunch of pressure on your opponent. Doesn't seem like the greatest card for the deck, but still seems like a solid red card. It is also an instant, so that is pretty nice as well. All right, and we also, in our artifacts, we got 8 artifacts. We got 4 copies of Experimental Synthesizer, just a very solid utility artifact here, and 4 copies of Spring Leaf Drum, as it's just a good way to fix your mana. And then down in our enchantments, we got 2 copies of Makeshift Munitions. Definitely very much a staple of any affinity deck in red. So you'll see this. I mean, we've seen this a lot in Grixis Affinity. Also, Boros Synthesizer, which is basically an affinity deck at this point, especially with more newer iterations playing All That Glitters. Makeshift Munitions is just pretty much a staple in any affinity deck in red. All right, and that is their main deck right now. Well, their land base here is on a 17 land build. We got 4 copies of Great Furnace, 3 basic islands, 4 Seat of Synod, 4 copies of Silver Bluff Bridge, and 2 copies of Volatile Fjord. So no Darksteel Citadels here, but they basically have the general amount of artifact lands you'd have in a two-color deck. So they got 12 artifact lands, which I would say is the bare minimum if you're going the affinity route, as they do count to uh, for your artifact count for things like Frogmite or Mirror Enforcer. All right, in their sideboard, we got 4 copies of Blue Elemental Blast. As you know, the red decks are very powerful. You want to be prepared for them. 2 copies of Flaring Pain. Let's see. And then, oh, we also got 4 copies of Galvanic Blast in the sideboard. This seems like a weird sideboard choice to me, as like I feel like you just want to run this main deck. And then we also got 3 copies of Red Elemental Blast. Very good card. And 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus, as obviously, like we said previously, you're going to want to be prepared for any deck that's using their graveyard in any way to leverage their opponent, especially, the Tolarian Terror decks, the combo decks, etc., etc. Still a pretty interesting affinity build. And the last deck that we're taking a look at is Tsunami deck by Sunakawa Hirokazu. Alright, so basically this is a take on Golgari Gardens, but a very off-meta take, so I'm excited to take a look at this and see what they got going on here. So there's a lot of variance going on here compared to what you usually see with, I guess you could say, stock Golgari Gardens lists. Alright, so we got 2 copies of Avenging Hunter in their creature pile, and 2 copies of Crypt Rats, 2 copies of Generous Ent, 3 copies of Guildsworn Prowler. Now, this is a card I've never really seen in Golgari Gardens. Definitely a very good card with things like Deadly Dispute. However, you don't get the added bonus with this card if you declared it as a blocker. So it wouldn't draw you an extra card there, though at other moments it could draw you an extra card with those sort of Deadly Dispute like effects. So yeah, pretty cool card. Excited to see this here. And we also got 3 copies of Penumbra Spider. So another great card to sack with your Deadly Disputes, or just use it as a blocker. So yeah, definitely great card. Can create more of 2/4 spiders with the fact that Dimir Fairies is one of the top decks right now. Having a 2/4 creature with reach is definitely very relevant in the current metagame. I don't really think Dimir Fairies is that dominant right now. Definitely kind of feel like that's more along the lines of Affinity and Koldatha builds at the moment. But it's still, if any of those decks got nerfed in any sort of way, if there was ever any upcoming bans, I think fairies, especially Dimir fairies, would start to be a lot better, as well as just the terror decks. So, a 2/4 with reach is going to be really hard for fairies to do exactly what they want to do. So that is a pretty cool include in this deck. We also got 3 copies of Seeker's Squire. This lets you kind of see more of your deck, can also easily just be a 2/3, which having a 2/3 creature right now, especially with a lot of Koldatha's creatures right now have 2 toughness when it comes to the Blast Runner, the Tomb Raiders, as well as this. There's a new Goblin card that came out as well, which is a 1/2 first strike, so also has 2 toughness. So having a 2/3 blocker against them seems pretty good right now. However, you need to make sure that it's a non-land card that you explore. That's easier said than done sometimes, but hey, if RNG works out in your favor, this card can be a really good blocker against Koldatha for you. All right, then we also got 2 copies of Troll of Khazad-dûm, just a really great card in the format. Basically, all of the land cyclers from the Lord of the Rings set are seeing play. They're just all very good cards. Obviously, we also have Generous Ent in this list. And also 2 copies of Troublemaker Oof. I'm not a huge fan of this card. I've kind of whiffed on this so many times where I just did not have something to bargain with it at the specific time that I had Troublemaker Oof in my hand. So not a huge fan of playing this. That's more of my personal preference. Alright, and in their sorcery pile, we got 3 copies of Chainer's Edict. It's been seen a little bit less play since Tithing Blade has been printed. I definitely feel like it's still a very good card, especially in a deck like Golgari Gardens, where you do tend to see a lot of lands, especially with all of your land cyclers and all the card draw that you have. You will easily get up to 7 mana. That's and you also are playing the long game, so you are going to see those lands the longer the game goes on. So yeah, Chainer's Edict is a great card, especially with the fact that it has flashback. We also got 2 copies of Drown in Sorrow. This card is definitely very good. You know, -2/-2 is very relevant in the format. Also, the scry is very nice. In their instant pile, we have 4 copies of Cast Down. Very, very good removal card in the format. Hits pretty much everything. Alright, and then we got 4 copies of Deadly Dispute. Just a solid card. Great 2 mana draw spell. You have to sacrifice an artifact or a creature, but that is going to be pretty easy to do, especially in this deck. Also creates a treasure token for you, so it helps you fix your mana. Very solid card. And we also got 1 copy of Fanatical Offering. So almost like a 5th copy of Deadly Dispute. Also, the map token and helping you explore is also really good. I've really been enjoying Fanatical Offering. I've been running 4 in my Golgari Gardens deck, and I really love this card. Also got 1 copy of Reaping the Grave. So one of the only legal storm cards in the format. You will probably see a lot of your lands. You could potentially have played a bunch of spells before playing Reaping the Graves and basically fill up your hand again with threats, whether that's Avenging Hunters, Trolls, or maybe, your Oofs or your Spiders, whatever it might be. This definitely is a very good card because also played on your opponent's turn after they've played a bunch of spells. So yeah, this card's pretty good. Great instant. And one of the few storm cards left in the format. All right, and we got 1 copy of Reckoner's Bargain. This could be a great way to gain some life, especially if you're sacrificing your Penumbra Spider, Avenging Hunter, or any of your big threats. If you have them out on the battlefield, that's a lot of life you're going to gain, and especially against the red decks, you're going to be wanting to gain some life. And the thing that I was never really expecting to see show up in Gardens is 2 copies of Undying Malice. Now, this definitely has a lot of synergy with things like Deadly Dispute, Fanatical Offering, Reckoner's Bargain. So you can play this before you play that card, before you sacrifice the creature they're going to sacrifice, and basically just return them to the battlefield. And also they get an extra +1/+1 counter. So just increasing their power and toughness is definitely pretty good. Also, you get more value out of either their ETB or death triggers that way. So pretty interesting to see that here. We don't see a whole lot of scam cards being played in the format, but always love seeing them pop up when they do. Also got 3 copies of Ichor Wellspring. So definitely one of the preferable targets for any of your Deadly Dispute like effects. Helps you draw an extra card. Also draws a card on ETB. And then in our enchantments, we got a card I don't think I've ever seen being played in any deck. We have Fungal Fortitude. Basically, it's an instant, except it is an enchantment. It has flash. And it's another scam card. So you can use this with your Deadly Disputes or just as a fun little combat trick or just in response to removal as well, or targeted removal. So yeah, pretty interesting card here. Don't think, like I've said, never seen this come up in any builds that I've looked at in the past. So that is pretty cool. In their land base, we got 18 land build here. We got 2 copies of Bojuka Bog. Definitely a staple in the format, just because decks that play out of the graveyard exist. You want to be prepared for them. If you're in black, Bojuka Bog is just one of the most useful cards you're going to see. We also got 3 copies of Dark Moss Bridge. So indestructible land makes me wonder if this player sees a bit of Panza wherever they play, as you are definitely going to want to have some lands that are going to stick around if you go up against Panza. And then we got 2 copies of Golgari Rod Farm. just a really good land in the format. All the bounce lands are, in my opinion, especially since we have so many lands at this point that have ETB effects, especially now, even with the new Pinger deserts. The bounce lands are seeming really good right now. We also got 3 copies of Golgari Gardens, which also synergizes with the bounce lands, and we are a gardens list here, so making our plant tokens is pretty necessary. And 1 copy of Mortuary Mire, 1 snow-covered forest, 4 snow-covered mountain, and 2 copies of Woodland Chasm. In their sideboard, we got another copy of Crypt Rats. So another great board wipe in the format. Also is a creature. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this card. We got 1 copy of Mind Extraction. Now, this is something I haven't seen. You have to sacrifice a creature with this, which kind of works with a lot of the scam cards they're running as well. If you're going up against a deck that has similar colors to you, like if you're on a mirror match, this seems like a very, very good card. Yeah, Mind Extraction can definitely get a lot of cards out of your opponent's hand, especially if they are running black or green. And we also got 3 copies of Pick Your Poison, which I think this card is a little slept on. I I don't think it's so good that every deck in green should be running it, though it is a great 1 mana spell, and also in terms of sideboard tech has a lot of different things that it can do for you. Definitely seems the best against all that glitters, as you can just make them sacrifice what will probably be their only enchantment. Unless they are the blue-white version, they definitely have that ninja that is also an enchantment. So it's going to be usually I usually prefer targeted removal, though this does, have an argument with the fact that it is just a 1 mana spell. We also got another copy of Reaping the Graves. We also got 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus. Very good card against all the graveyard decks. We've basically been seeing relics in all the decks we've covered tonight, or today rather. And we also got 2 copies of River Boa. So this seems like a pretty good blocker, though I'm not really sure if I like it in the sideboard. Definitely does have Island Walk. So there are, a fair amount of decks, especially in the tier 1 decks that are in blue and do run islands or island typed cards. So that nice little 2-1 beater there. We also got 2 copies of Rotten Reunion. Another great piece of tech against, uh, I would say specifically combo decks, especially ones that want to do a ghostly flicker loop. This is a really good card against them, as it is instant speed. Also creates a token which synergizes with your oof there if you're trying to use the bargain ability. Though ultimately that's probably the only way it truly synergizes with the deck outside of, your Deadly Dispute like effects, is that it's now just an expendable creature for you to sacrifice. Also has Flashback, which is also really nice. I really love running cards with Flashback, especially in grindier mid-range decks like this, as sometimes you just need to do it another time, and you can sometimes get into a situation where a lot of your card draws have just been drawing you dead cards or lands and stuff like that. So having something in your graveyard that is basically an extra card in your hand is always very, very nice. And then, of course, we got our 3 copies of Weather the Storm, because the red decks are out there, and this is just probably the best gain life spell in green. Black doesn't really have much outside of maybe Cram Session, or if you're on the Devotion plan, there's always Gary. But Weather the Storm here in Golgari Gardens, definitely one of the best things that you could be running to fight against the red decks. That's gonna do it for today's video, everyone. Thanks again to anyone who stuck around to the end. You are a very, very cool person. But I will have links to all the decks that we went over today down in the description below, and would love to hear your thoughts on the decks that we covered today. Are there any here that you think have some potential, or other card selection here that you like or dislike? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, guys, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.